Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live recording of the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my extra special guest, James Dreyfus. James, welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm all the better for having you on the podcast. We're always delighted to talk to you. And I think a lot of listeners will agree that you've become a kind of font of common sense over the past few years. And I've watched with great curiosity as you've kind of your career as one of our finest comic actors has given way to this new kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a career, but maybe a mission or just an urge to correct a lot of the bollocks of the 21st century, especially around gender issues and other issues as well. So we're thrilled to speak to you about all that stuff. And I guess I want to kick off, given that it's nearly Christmas, it's nearly the end of the year, I want to kick off by asking you if at the end of 2024, you feel more optimistic about that stuff than you did at the start of the year? Because a lot of stuff has happened this year, and I wonder how you're feeling about it now.
Just to start off with, I'm just going to say, I guess your comment about my career and the addressing things are going on at the moment. I'm doing it absolutely reluctantly. In fact, I feel a bit pissed off the fact that we even have to be having these conversations in this day and age. However, having said that, how do I feel now as opposed to the beginning of the year? I think what we're seeing is a return, a very slow return to common sense, but I'm not filled with the sort of optimism of, you know, woke, for the sake of a better word, being dead and buried. Not by a long way. I think we're in for a lot of doubling down, and we're in for a lot of people claiming that they didn't say things or hold a position that they once did, even though, we hold the receipts. And I'm watching what's happening in America, obviously, with the complete transition from one side to the other, and I'm seeing a lot of Americans celebrating the fact that finally, possibly there might be some sort of basic common sense coming back. I'm not talking politically; I'm talking socially. Might be coming back, and I sort of look here, and I think there's a sort of a remorse going on of, oh God, we've got 5 more years of battling this. So whilst it's good to see the beginnings of it, I think the battle is far from over. I wish I could be more optimistic.
Yeah, I feel similarly, actually, where you sometimes feel it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or maybe 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I'm not sure which one, but yes, things are moving in an interesting direction. But I think the battles are far from over. I think that's absolutely right. I did want to ask you about a couple of things that have happened this year, which seem to me to be quite positive. So there's the cast review, because one thing that you talk about quite a lot and people really value your contribution to this crazy discussion is on the gender question and the trans issue, what it's doing to women's rights, what it's doing to gay rights, what it's doing to gay kids, all these incredibly important questions. And there have been there've been a few significant developments on that front. There's been the cast review. More recently, there's been the announcement that the prohibition on puberty blockers will be a bit more permanent than we might have thought. When you look at developments like that, do you chalk it up to feminists and others, people like you as well, being willing to be a thorn in the side of the establishment? Do you think it's proof that it's possible to cut through this stuff? And do you feel optimistic on that front, at least in relation to something like puberty blockers, the meddling with young kids' bodies? How do you feel about that question now?
Well, it's like I said in my speech at the for the LGB Alliance, that to underestimate what's happened let's say in the past 10 years, to have expected women and gay people to simply roll over and accept this new religion, is to expose that you don't actually know what a woman is, or people were never going to roll over on this issue, and people were saying yes, but transsexuals have been using bathrooms and changing rooms for years. Well, that's probably true, but the point of the matter is, you've never been able to dress like I am, and walk into a place and say, well, this is mine, and it's my right to have it. When you impinge upon the rights of another group, you're going to get pushback. And I think, much as I loathe social media, well, I love to loathe it, but that's another matter. Much as I hate it, I think it's shown that the battle, um, that's where it's being fought. And people say, well, yeah, but in real life it does, most people don't think about it. Well, they would think about it if we suddenly had a situation where your 6-year-old daughter was in a changing room and a man came in and started showering. So this is it's a sort of uh, it's really standing up and saying, look, these rights were fought and won for years ago. We got to a point for gay people where we could meet and we had about a 15-year grace period of where you know things weren't too bad. You didn't have to go to, people didn't really care. And I'd always thought that that's what we were working towards. We were working towards equality, so that I would not have to sit here and say I'm an openly gay actor, which is because my sexuality is the least interesting thing about me. I just don't think anyone gives a damn. But we've come back, and so all those labels that promised were going have come back triple fold. And I think that the importance of figures like J.K. Rowling speaking up is not to say that she thinks she's the queen of all, but what she's done is given ordinary people a voice, because she has their back, and it's sort of emboldened people to say, actually, do you know what? I kind of do have an issue with that. So yeah, I think the importance of it can't be underestimated. What goes on from the smallest account to the largest account.
It's interesting. You said earlier that one thing you anticipate, and I think it's probably happening already, is that people will start denying that they held certain views or denying that they said certain things. And as you say, we've got the receipts, and I think we should hold on to those receipts, not from a sense of vengeance, but just to remind people what can happen when society goes mad. Um, and I often find myself thinking exactly what you've just said, and wondering to myself, how does a society lose the plot as much as our societies have? So when you think about some of the things that have happened over the past few years, I mean, to put it bluntly, young lesbians being put on drugs to turn them into so-called men, for example, or young gay boys being told, well, maybe you're a girl, so maybe you should be chemically castrated with drugs that we normally give to men with late-stage prostate cancer or sex offenders. When you say it like this, and I've said it like that to many people I know, it does sound really, really horrifying, because it was really horrifying. And when you think about what has been done in the name of the gender ideology in particular, it does raise the question, doesn't it, of how does this happen to a society? How do so many people who are well educated and sometimes even well meaning, how do they fall so far down a rabbit hole of lunacy that they end up inflicting such pain on young people and women and others? How does that happen, do you think?
Yeah, good question. How does that happen? I mean, I've been reading so many books about how these things happen. A wonderful book is The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, which does sort of go some way to explain how this happens. But this has happened in such a remarkably short time, um, and has had such devastating consequences. And yet there seems to be some sort of complete removal in some people's heads. There was an interview today with someone saying, "Well, if you just hate trans people, then you're just part of a hate group and you're no better than Nazi." And you think that's not what the issue is about. The goalposts are constantly being moved, and what I'm finding now, it's the power of persuasion, or the power of showing somebody facts. In the past, someone would say something, and you'd open a book and you'd go, no, you're wrong. That's actually what happened. That's all gone. I think it's all gone. So this thing that we're on now, this social experiment gone mad and won't get any better any soon, is, you know, you've got a million people saying the same thing. No one is listening because they have their facts. And what I've never experienced before is this demonstrative, no, I'm in my corner. And it seems that people just double down now. They just double down. And even when the inevitable lawsuits start happening, which they will, and children grow up and realize that actually no, they should not have been instantly affirmed in anything. There should have been some delicate time, because we're talking about kids here. I'm talking about teenagers, young people. It ruins lives, and anyone who speaks out about it, their lives are ruined. But this is the good thing about what's happening now, is the mask has slipped. The smoke and mirrors are going away, and a lot more people are now feeling bold to say, do you know what? If you teach a child something, they'll believe it. This has been said many times on social media, but if you teach a child something, they believe it. That's what children do. That's what they are. So I think we've got to go strip it all away and go back to taking that as a really serious responsibility. And it is coming to a head, but how much damage has been done in the meantime? I mean, one could just hold one's head, in one's hands and scream sometimes, because you think, well, we've got to go through this to come out the other side. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but
Yeah, that is a good answer, and it's funny listening to you say that. Often people like you and many others people will say, "Oh, you hate trans people. You're like the Nazis," and I always want to remind them that, wasn't it the Nazis who carried out medical experiments on gay people? And I'm not calling them Nazis either, but
absolutely.
let's people in glass houses, etc.
Absolutely.
One thing that I think is really important in this is what can happen when people aren't allowed to speak freely. So what can happen in a climate of censorship or a climate of fear? Because I think a lot of the reasons these crazy things happened is because for some time, it's changed in recent years, but for some time people were scared to speak up. So I think about the puberty blockers issue, for example. I was asked the other day on a TV thing, why did it take so long for the government to start thinking seriously about the problem of giving kids puberty blockers? And then you remind yourself that, when the Irish singer Roisin Murphy said on a private Facebook conversation that puberty blockers are, excuse my language, fucked and shouldn't be given to kids, she was demonized all over the place. She was smeared in The Guardian. Some of her concerts were cancelled. She was made persona non grata, essentially. And that was a powerful reminder, I thought, that it was difficult for some time for people to speak out. And isn't it the case that if we aren't free to raise these questions, then the problems themselves can never really be addressed?
100%. I mean, a perfect example, and I hope you won't mind me using him as an example, but is Graham Linehan, who's been saying this for years, and who was way ahead of the curve on this, and now look what has happened. So if you're not allowed to say things, if you're not allowed to, I mean, of course, people say, oh, you only want freedom of speech so you can say something racist to somebody else, and all that nonsense. Well, obviously that's not the case. That's a pathetic excuse. It's the freedom to be able to say things and not have your entire life destroyed through fear. And that's exactly what's been happening, is the fear. So Graham rings the bell, alerts a lot of people. Roisin Michaud, is that how you pronounce it? It's almost like cracking an egg. She cracks the egg, and then others think, oh, well, you know what? If she's cracked that bit of that egg, I can crack that bit of egg. And so I think it's taking the bits off the shell. And now the egg is so naked, you can see it's an egg. It's and more people now are actually going, and of course there's more information out now. Were it not for the internet, would we have heard anything about this, because our mainstream media certainly wasn't reporting it. Our mainstream media is unbelievably remiss in what it chooses not to report on. It's sort of it's almost criminal by omission, um, because you would have thought this would be a major a major concern to them, but it's not. So again, I think a lot of people who got up early, and and I have to say, it's a large proportion of women have done the fighting on this, and have at some cost. And the revisionism that's happening at the moment over who said what, which is what we talked about earlier, I'm finding really disturbing. Um, like I say, I mean, I don't want to be really down about this, but I do think that we're about to go in. We're going through a sort of quiet canal at the moment. We've come out of a raging one. We're going through a quiet canal, and we're going to go back out to sea. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's a yes. One always needs to be alert to that possibility that it's just the calm before another storm, and I
I
think that
think so.
could well prove to be the case. Um, I think you're absolutely right about Graham Linehan. I think he's been heroic on this question for a long time, as have you. But I do want to ask you about a constituency you just mentioned there, which is women, and there are loads of women who've been speaking about on this. Some have been doing it for a long time. Some have done it more recently. But there's a special um, animosity I feel towards the women who speak out. Now you get it in the neck, and Graham, of course, gets it in the neck, possibly more than any other bloke on this matter. But I've often found that there's a real kind of swirling invective, in particular for women who dare to speak up against the excesses of the trans ideology. We see it with J.K. Rowling. We see it with Kathleen Stock, who was essentially hounded out of Sussex University by a baying mob. We see it with Kelly J. Keane, also known as Posey Parker, who was assaulted by a feral mob of misogynists when she went to New Zealand. Really horrific stuff. There is this kind of violent animus towards women. What do you think explains the misogynistic component to this? Were we wrong to think, as we might have done over the past few years, that misogyny was a thing of the past? Was it always there lurking? Or is there something about this ideology in particular that kind of draws it back out?
That's really interesting. Obviously, I'm going to answer it in a couple of ways, but I think that misogyny is always there. Always there. You can hear it in the rhetoric every single day. Shut up, you silly woman. Be quiet. Sit down. Rein it in. You're shrill. Harpy. All these words. You just think. I think it's still misogyny has never gone away. It might have gone out, done a costume change, and then come back on stage in a different form, but it's never really gone away. And now you have, especially the leaders of the trans ideology. If people have problem with them because the way they address women, it is cloaked in misogyny. And you just think to yourself, how do you think that advocating for your cause by going after women and calling them bitches, or filming yourself in ladies' loos going, I've got one over you, I'm better than you, that song by Jordan Gray, I'm a better woman than you are. How is that going to benefit your cause? How are you going to convince? All it does is make a lot of women go, well, this is the reason. This is the reason why we don't want you sharing our spaces, taking our spaces. Number one, it's not like they came asking. It was, this is going to happen. And I just can't see any other reason. I mean, maybe it's something to do with it's this aggression that comes from. It's a very, very male expression of anger, and I have noticed that. And any woman who's been on social media will tell you, if you make a point, the man will answer and will sometimes get a much, much more reasonable response than if a woman answers and it's "shut up, bitch." I mean, you talk Julie Bindel. Julie Bindel goes through it every day. Helen Joyce goes through it. Helen Stanislav goes through it every day. Maya Forster goes through it every single day. There is this culture still, which I'm not sure will ever go away. Like, I don't believe homophobia will completely go away. To say you want to eradicate it, yes, it's a noble cause, but it won't ever really happen. Why? Because there will always be some idiots out there. There will always be people that just will be like that. But I have to say, this TRA thing of you will do what I say or else. And at these, let's take for example Posey Parker being attacked in New Zealand. It was mainly a group of men, masked men, screaming at her, and yet I didn't see anyone who claims to be an ally of this movement turning around and saying, "Hang on a second, there's a group of men." If Kelly Jean had fallen over at that moment in the middle, being escorted out, she would have been killed. She would have been killed. And this is where I'm frightened where this is going to go, because the anger, and it's not, don't give me the both, no, I'm not saying to you don't give me, but people in general, don't give me this both sides thing. I mean, it's incomparable.
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
and yeah, I spoke to Kelly J. Keane shortly after that incident, and she
oh,
said
did you?
she feared for her life because
But
it
you
was
could see
so.
it. You could see it. There was a moment, you could see it on her face, where the police weren't there, no one was helping her, there were two, and there was a moment where she almost tripped, and I thought, my God.
Yeah, it
And to
it
get to the
was.
stage where no one will say anything about that, I think is really horrifying.
Yeah, I think that's actually a key point, because I think you're right that there's always going to be bigotry around, because there's always going to be idiots around. There's always going to
Yeah,
be men who hate women, and there's always going to be people who hate gay people. They'll always be around, but I think that what society needs to be careful not to do is to give license to those views and
yeah,
to give a green light to them. And I think one of the things that concerns me about the trans ideology is that it gave a green light to those prejudices. It said, come on then, express them publicly, dress them up in politically correct language, and knock yourselves out. And that was the real problem there.
yeah.
I did want to ask you about. It's interesting to hear you say that these trans activists often sound like angry sexist men, and that is quite an amusing side of it, because they will go around saying we're women, and you think to yourself, well, why do you sound like such sexist blokes from the 1970s? It doesn't quite add up. And it brought to mind when a group of trans activists a week or so ago, including Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning, they stormed the women's toilets in the US Capitol because there's a campaign to make the women's toilets for women only, not for trans people or men. And these trans activists stormed the toilet, basically occupied the toilets. And you think to yourself, political campaigns in the past would occupy the workplace or occupy a student campus in protest against the Vietnam War. But here we had essentially a bunch of men occupying a woman's bathroom for their right to take a leak in the women's bathroom. And you think, how has so-called progressive politics come to this? And I just want to ask you about women's spaces, because to me this is the easiest part of this question, which is that women have fought for a very long time to keep certain places for women only, particularly places where women have to undress or spend the night or go when they've experienced assault. We've all understood for a very long time that there are some places that are for women only, but often trans activists make a beeline for those places in particular and really essentially barge in some situations. What do you think explains their animosity to those kinds of spaces, which I thought were a settled part of modern society?
Yeah, so I mean, God, didn't we all? I mean, if you think about being a teenager, let alone a teenage girl, uh, 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 you know, getting dressed for swimming was bad enough when you're a boy. I mean, forget what it's like for a girl. But we seem to have completely forgotten this, and this is one of the subjects that Beverly Jackson and Kate Harris, Nyleen Gallagher, and Kate Barker make of the LGB Alliance. Is they say it's not just about the bathrooms. The bathrooms is a sort of it's a sort of, I hate the word, but a gateway. It's about the beginning of the territories, because it's not just bathrooms, it's changing rooms, it's public areas, it's where it's prisons, it's sports. I mean, it's even sort of swimming areas, with the ladies' pond, Mitch Fest, the lesbian festival in America, gone. All these things, unless you acquiesce, you have to, you're gone. This is how it was. I think that's slowly changing, but I think the animosity is their greatest mistake. They continue shooting themselves in the foot with plainly antagonistic, aggressive behavior. There was one particular guy who was saying, "If you come near me and I'm using the bathroom, it'll be the last move you ever make." And you just watch it and you think, do you know what, that's not going to convince anybody, really, is it? I mean, that's just not. But this is why I always say this cause, number one, has done real harm to transsexual people who've been lumped in with this, to intersex people, who don't want to be a part of this. And I'm focusing on the TRAs, which people like India Willoughby claim don't exist. They do exist in their millions, and they are the ones that have decided to drag this into the gutter. So we all have to get down and dirty to fight this. I can't tell you. I mean, I've had transsexual friends from the 80s, that I used to hang out with. And every single one of them, I tell you, are sick to the back teeth of this. This is not their fight, but they've been dragged into this by a new breed, a new batch of people who suddenly come along and say, well, but I think this is a problem of when we stopped identifying with things and we started identifying as things. Now, you'd say, in the past, I'm a punk, okay, or I'm a mod, or I'm a rocker, and you'd join that club with the clothes and the attitude and the hairstyles and where you hung out, and all these things was how one identified. Gender ideology and queer theory pushes the opposite to that. And it's strange because, I see people saying, I'm non-binary. Are my clothes non-binary enough? And you think, well, they're dungarees, love. What is my hair non-binary, love? You've got a haircut. Why are you making something that you're not oppressed? Because actually, most people go, okay, if you want to identify, you can identify as you like. I have no problem with people saying they're non-binary. What I do have a problem with is the additional rules that come along with it. Compelled speech, and these are all tried and tested tactics of anyone who wants to act like a dog and come in and urinate on it on a lamppost. It's marking territory more than anything else.
Yeah, it's to me it's quite straightforward, which is that people can identify as anything they want, even though I think often it's a waste of time, but that's their business. They can dress how they want, they can do what they want, but the minute they try to compel other people to think a certain way or to speak a certain way, or even worse, to throw open their hard-won spaces so that they can go in, that's where it becomes a problem. And I think that's probably the case for most people. Most people are live and let live, but if you're banging on the door of a rape crisis center and saying, I'm a man and I must come into this place, then people are not going to have any truck with that at all.
Absolutely. But it seems that but I don't think it's just about this cause. It seems like every cause at the moment has this entitlement, and the way people behave and reacting to issues, be they political, be they social, but everyone seems to be acting in a sort of crazy way at the moment. For one example, Just Stop Oil, and you think, by destroying works of art or sitting in the middle of the road, you're actually pissing off a lot of people that might otherwise say, you know what, you've got a point. I might not agree with that, but everyone just seems to be that this is my point of view, and this is the only way that things will work. And if you don't agree with me, you're a Nazi. I mean, everything comes down to that. So I don't think this is particularly unique to this movement.
Yeah, absolutely right. Okay, speaking of Nazis, I want to ask you about the LGB Alliance, which you've mentioned already. And as we know, they're often called far right. People campaign for them to have their charity funding taken away, and they're called a hate group. I mean, we haven't seen such a hysterical response to a gay rights group since the 1980s, when there was all that kind of last round of hysteria about gay rights groups. It really is extraordinary. Only this time it's not coming from the kind of moralistic right, it's coming from the woke left. And I did want to ask you about, you mentioned speaking for the LGB Alliance, and they do such incredibly important work, and they get such an enormous amount of flack. One thing that's interesting about them from my perspective is that it does seem quite a generational thing. So I don't want to diss anyone, but if you look at the wonderful people who run the LGB Alliance, they do tend to come from a different generation to some of these kind of trans activists and trans allies. So to what extent do you think there's a kind of generational common sense that is coming into play on some of these questions in relation to LGB rights, women's rights, and so on?
Well, yes, okay, I accept, but I think if one looks at, I'll just take my own example. If you're coming from a place where you think you've come through the worst of the battle, you're in a place where being lesbian's okay, and being bisexual's okay, and being homosexual's okay, and then you're tethered to a group that are behaving in such a way that you're losing support that you once had, and you're watching over time your rights slowly be eroded to the point where a man can say, I identify as a woman, therefore you have to include me in your dating pool. It's of little wonder that people of a certain generation who had all that freedom and fought for it. I mean, don't forget Kate and Bev, founder of Gay Lib, and one of the used to work for Stonewall. I mean, they didn't want to come back out and fight this war more than, but it was essential. And of course, what's most ghastly about all this is that the worst attacks have come from the Q plus in that long list of things. Now they have been the worst. They did exactly the same thing to David Bridle's Lesbian and Gay News, which was on here, which was a brilliant, very balanced newspaper. Same thing, hate group. Because why do this? Why spread this lie? Because it's easy. It's so fucking easy, isn't it? You just have to point a finger and go hate group, and a million people will go, oh yeah, hate group. Why? Because the T's not on there. Do you know that there were trans people at the first conference? No, I don't believe it. And anyway, they're all straight. They're not actually. Here's facts. Don't believe it, don't want to. So we're at this stage. So it's hard because you've got people from, gay people going, they're a hate group. And I just want to throttle them because I think you weren't there. It's like I said at the conference. If if you're intending on reviewing a book, read the bloody thing first. Read it.
Yeah,
Don't just look at
yeah.
the blurb on the back and go, I mean, are we now saying that the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus is transphobic and lesbophobic and biphobic? And what are we saying that? Because that's all it is. It's for same-sex attracted people. And it's not that any of the other letters are they're just different. It's just different. They're not same-sex attracted. And when you've worked so hard and you see it being destroyed by the very people who helped get those rights, because a lot of the people who did some great work in the early years have gone mental in the last 10 years, destroy it in front of your very eyes. It's the most frustrating thing imaginable. And there are, year by year, don't forget the LGB Alliance is still a grassroots organization, but it's so early on and there's much more work to do. But every year I see more and more young people coming and more really switched on gays and lesbians and bisexual people going, you know what, this is really needed. I felt like I needed this. So, if ever you hear anyone talking about the LGB Alliance as a hate group, just know that it's absolute rubbish. Turn up, come to the conference. Yes, you have to buy a ticket. It's like if you want to see a film, you buy a ticket and you go and see it. Go and listen to what they have to say, because what's being spread about them at the moment is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's such nonsense. I mean, anyone who's ever met anyone from the LGB Alliance will know that they are lovely people, actually, as well as doing some very important campaigning.
And they're not straight; they're all gay.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about the fate of lesbians in particular, because it does seem to me that they get a particularly raw deal from this side of the ideology and this side of wokeness, because you now have a situation. I mean, people might remember that Kate Harris from the LGB Alliance, who you've mentioned, she went through the most extraordinary situation in 2022 when she was in a court case involving mermaids and all that rubbish. And she was grilled on the stand about what it means to be a lesbian. And basically, she was asked, can a lesbian have a penis? And she got very upset by this line of questioning. And she made a really good case standing up for lesbians and saying, look, this is what a lesbian is. They are women who love women, and nothing else will suffice as an explanation. And it was, I remember reading about that and thinking, how have we got into a situation where in the 21st century, a lesbian is being grilled publicly about whether someone with a dick can be a lesbian? It's so extraordinary. But it's very reminiscent of the 70s and the 80s, because one of the gross things that bigots used to say about lesbians, well, all they need is a good seeing to. That was one thing that bigots used to say about lesbian women. And you kind of have a resuscitation of that now, because there is this idea that lesbians have to accept men who identify as lesbians into their dating pools, into their circles, into their clubs, and so on. And, even in some situations, that they are expected to sleep with men who claim to be women. And if they don't, they're transphobic. I mean, that really is just garden variety homophobia, isn't it? Where you're saying to a gay person, you must have sex with someone of the opposite sex, otherwise you're a weirdo and a bigot.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'd say with lesbians, it is worse, because basically what people are saying is you're basically a receptacle. If you use a dildo, sorry to be blunt, but if you use a dildo, what's wrong with the penis? I've seen this argument happening. I mean, lesbians cannot even meet publicly. Have a club for themselves. They are meeting covertly in 2024. They're meeting covertly. We just had the Tickle versus Giggle thing where Roxy Tickle wants a. Now, why would you do that? Why would you go to an app which is specifically for women if you didn't want to simply go there and be antagonistic about it, and to be frankly bloody minded about it and dog in the manger about it? If I can't have it, I'm going to make damn sure that you don't either. And why are women's feelings less important? And why are women's rights less important than a man's feelings? What? Why? Oh well, be nice and be up. No. They fought for these rights for years, and we're still nowhere near there. But to watch people going over and saying, "Oh God, your feelings must be so hurt," and I always think to myself, "Hang on a second, 51% of the population, what? It seems so much respect. Not maybe there wasn't there before, but I wasn't brought up to treat women like this or think of them as so disposable. I mean, I've watched 13-year-old girls testify, in cases in America, pleading with school boards, that sit there like robots, and they don't. And this tiny girl is going, boys, doing this and the thing. I mean, it's almost as if these people think that no bad people exist in the world at all. And I'm not saying bad people are trans. There's bad people in every. There are bad gays, there's bad straights, there's bad trans, there's bad. There are bad people around, and it's why we have a little something called safeguarding, or we used to care about it. And you know what we do? We put the child's interests first. Now it seems like you've got teachers making TikTok videos going, I was misgendered by by one of my students, and I got them into trouble because, and people are giving sympathy to the teacher. And you think, I, that's just a tiny example, but everything is us about face now. Left is left is right, up is down, night is day. Everything is the opposite now, and I don't understand. I don't understand when people thought this was acceptable. But then again, maybe it's just, well, it's like a huge shoal of fish. It only takes one at the front of the shoal before everyone suddenly lurches to the other side, uh, which I hope will happen. But uh, I'm just left staggered, and I don't have answers. But there are very interesting books, written by people like Andrew Gold and Andrew Doyle about this woke mind virus, that the way Musk put it. And I think there's something to be said for that. Social contagion is nothing new. I mean, it's a phenomenon, and it seems to be here. But like all contagions, uh, mercifully, relatively brief.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you talk about, men who identify as lesbians saying "let me into your club" or whatever, because you just think back to your, one's childhood, or when one was a teenager, and the very thought of a bloke barging into a women's space just wouldn't have crossed most people's minds. You could be in a pub and you could be 3 sheets to the wind, completely drunk, and you still knew that you didn't go anywhere near the women's bathroom. That was not for men to go into. And yet there is this sense of entitlement or just arrogance, which means people think they have the right to go anywhere if it helps to validate their identity. That's the problem here, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I did want to ask you about, which we've kind of touched on already in relation to the censorship question, and you've mentioned it there now with the woke mind virus. I wanted to ask you about cancel culture and where you think cancel culture is at the moment, especially in the arts and entertainment, which is the world that you come from. I think I've told you before that Gimme, Gimme, Gimme is literally one of my all-time favorite TV shows. Lots of people will remember you in that with Kathy Burke. I do sometimes find myself thinking, would it be made today? It was very kind of, it was kind of grotesquely camp and quite tongue in cheek, and made fun of gay people and made fun of this working class woman. I mean, it was raucous and hilarious. But you do think, would that be made today, or would it be called, would it be insufficiently politically correct? What do you think about where TV is at, and culture and comedy? Is it being strangled by all this stuff?
Well, look, my personal view on this, I mean, all comedy is subjective. It's not that something isn't funny, it's just the fact that you don't find it funny. Like Ricky Gervais has said often. I don't know, there might be some comedy out there, but you see, when people say woke comedy, I'm not buying that, because by definition, woke comedy isn't comedy. It's sneering, it's clever, it's too clever for its own good, it's snide, it's it even has the audacity to mention things like cancel culture, and drop in little things as if they're sort of being edgy, and actually what they're really doing is conforming to what you want to see. It probably could be made today, Gimme, 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 but it wouldn't be anything like what it was. It would probably have a sort of tagged on ending going, you know, but then again, guys, we've got to look at the other side, and we've got to realize, you know what I mean? There would be a coda to it. No codas needed back then, but this has been an issue since, Johnny Spate wrote Till Death Us Do Part, hasn't it? I mean, a misunderstanding comedy. I mean, it says something, doesn't it, when one of our greatest comedian minds, along with a highly intelligent stand-up comic who presented a channel, are leaving the country to write comedy because it's so stifling here. I mean, that's a damning indictment right there. I mean, I don't know when the last time you belly laughed at anything, but I only can do it when I go through YouTube or find clips. Maybe that's an age thing. I don't know. Like I said, it's all subjective. But I just find everything at the moment rather like a sort of, a sort of tasteless bowl of porridge. It's there. You can turn it on. You can turn it off. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't challenge you. But then the people in charge who make these things, people say to me, well, why don't you just write something? Right. Well, I am writing something, but then you've got the problem of who's going to make it, which is what Andrew and Graham have come across. Who's going to make it? They won't even release the Father Ted musical because it's still got Graham Linehan's name on it, and he's been, as you can see, vindicated day by day by day by day by day. Everything he said was happening is happening. Still won't release it. I think the arts are in real trouble because of identity politics. The moment you decide to come in and bring your entire authentic self to work, it's a disaster. Why your whole point is to come in and not bring your bloody authentic self to work. The whole point is to come in and do your job. And tell the story, and no one's interested in what you are or who you. No, I'm not interested in how you feel about that. I'm just interested in what. So, and I think, of course, but the arts has always been like that. It's always been the first to go. So I don't know. I'm still sitting here just twiddling my thumbs, really.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's right. And so that's Graham Linehan and Andrew Doyle you mentioned there, who, if people don't know, they're off to America to write a sitcom. And as you say, it seems that they just didn't think they could do it here, and so they're going somewhere else. And that is an indictment of 21st century Britain, I guess. There is one of the positive things that's happened over the past year or so, alongside some other things too, is that there is this pushback against cancel culture in the arts. So Rosie Kay has got a new group, Freedom in the Arts, which is doing excellent work, and she's talked about that on this pod. And there are other people pushing back against this climate of censorship as well. But I just wanted to ask you, before I move on to a few questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you what it feels like, I guess, to be on the receiving end of this stuff. So we've talked about Graham Linehan, who's really had it in the neck for quite some time, and basically lost his career as a consequence of this, and lost lots of friends too. There are other people like Gareth Roberts, who's a great writer, writes for Spiked, writes for other places too. He lost a lot of writing work as a consequence of his common sense approach. And you've experienced some of that too, I guess, because you're a well-known person in comparison to the rest of us. What's it like to be on the receiving end of that? What have the consequences been for you for saying the things that you say?
Well, a bafflement, because 10 years ago, I still don't think I've said anything controversial. Sorry, but I have exactly the same opinions that I had 10 years ago. Everything else has moved. And that's not just not moving with the times, that's something completely different. But my opinions on the basics have not changed at all. But suddenly something happened, and I was doing, a Doctor Who audio thing, it was fine. It was a fine job. I don't know much about Doctor Who. I really don't, but I was playing the Master. And it was the way they did. They put out a tweet suggesting that I was transphobic, and then I was dropped from their show, and then it sort of spreads like wildfire. And actually, it's horrible. It's horrible because you don't get a right to reply. You can write a tweet saying I'm not transphobic, but who's going to pay any attention to that? The damage is done. So, that's when I realized, okay, well, but you can't just dip your toe into these things. You either get in the bath or you stay out of the bath. And I just thought to myself, do you know what? I'm not going to be told what to say and how to say it by people, especially rudely. By people who say, "Oh, you're so aggressive back," and I said, "No, I'm aggressive to people who turn up and say you're a fucking fat failed actor. Fuck you." Then I'll give you what you got back. But then they go, "Oh my god, you must hate trans people. I'm trans." Well, don't be an arsehole then. So I don't know. It's not nice to be on the receiving end of it, and I'm sure I've lost a lot of work as a consequence. The only thing is I'll never know, will I? Because people won't tell me. It's like I'm sure I used to when I came out as an actor in 1990. I lost a lot of work. My agent were very supportive, but they did say if you're out, things might get a little tricky. But I thought, no, this is who I am. So I've sort of gone from losing work in a risky thing to a sort of 10-year grace period back to the same place. So it's frustrating. But actually, in a way, quite liberating now, because I just think, you know what, I'm just going to say what I think.
There's, I mean, people underestimate how important it is, to the good life itself, to say what you think, and to for people to be able to express themselves. I mean, that is an essential component of what it means to be a human. And I'm sure other people who keep stum might get certain gigs or certain benefits, but in the long run, I think they lose out. That's my view.
Okay.
Okay, James, I've got some questions from the audience. This is an interesting one. In relation to wokeness and the gender ideology, do you think there is a class? Is it something more prevalent amongst the middle and upper classes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say almost entirely a middle class thing. Absolutely. But yes, I do. I think it's very much, But then they'll twist it by saying, "Ah, you see, that means it's only a few people are concerned about it. It's only a few of the chattering middle class." But no, it's not, because a few chattering over here becomes a huge cacophony over a while. So I'd say yes.
I was thinking recently that some of the transsexuals I've met in the past over the years have often been working class men
Yeah,
from that, and whereas a lot of the I've never met a modern day trans activist who hasn't sounded very posh to me. So there's something's going on.
yes, absolutely, 100%.
Um, okay, this is. I'm going to ask you this question while bearing in mind that we are two men talking about this. But some Daniel asks, you've talked about the awful misogynistic component to trans ideology. So James, why are so many feminists standing with these fetishistic, misogynistic men? What do you think?
Well, I think that he's talking about intersectional feminists, isn't he? Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Are they feminists? If you're an intersexual feminist, doesn't that one cancel out the other? I mean, yeah. Uh, that's all my responses to it. It's an odd position if you are saying you're a feminist.
Yeah, I think it's yeah. I mean, if you think women's spaces should be thrown open to men, including men who want to parade around naked, I'm not sure that counts as feminism in any
Personally, I don't think so.
dictionary definition. Yeah. Um. Okay, this is an interesting question. This is from Andy. Are female to male transitions, so women who identify as men,
Yeah.
are they less socially problematic than male to female? That's an interesting one.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't see any male to female. I guess it's because, let's say, for example, sports. What would they benefit from um, wanting wanting that? What would they in fact, it really clearly shows the delineation between men and women. I mean, it sort of answers its own question there. I mean, what is the benefit? Women and men are different. They do things differently. You know they are built physically. So I guess that question is a bit of a sort of self own, because if you really think about it, it answers a lot of the questions it poses.
That's right, absolutely. And it's yeah, and there's the fundamental basic question of men being for the most part bigger and stronger than women. So that does make it more problematic when men want to go into women's sports or women's.
Of course it does. Well, I mean, why is there such a huge thing of women getting raped or battered, domestic abuse? I mean, there's one reason only. Most of the time, they're overpowered. So
Yeah, yeah. Okay, a question from Kerry. Again, I'm conscious of the fact that we are two men talking about this. But Kerry says men who identify as women often claim they feel like a woman.
yeah,
She says, as a woman, I have no idea what feeling like a woman means. Is that even possible? And then I think this is the more important question, which you've touched on already earlier on. How did how you feel end up informing who you are? So it kind of comes back to that point you made earlier, where identifying as, or that kind of elevation of one's own feelings above everything else, including normal social life. How do you think that came about, that kind of culture of narcissism, I guess?
Well, I mean, to answer the original question about the feeling, people can feel whatever they want. And I think it's a perfectly normal, especially when you're a teenager, of having these sort of feelings of, I don't know who I am, I don't feel comfortable in my body, I don't feel this, I don't feel that. But if you're taught something from an early age that this is the reason why this is happening, that's the conclusion you're going to come to. So we've sort of created a problem that wasn't there in the first place, and now people can go, well, my feelings are important. If you tell a child, now listen, if any of you are non-binary, and you put your hand up, it's absolutely okay, and you get a lolly, and you give the child a lolly, what will happen in the next week, do you think? That's why the schools, there'll be 3 kids going, I'm non-binary. And if they're taught that's something real, it's not their fault. They believe it's real. So it becomes a thing. So I don't understand this. And also some people genuinely do have gender dysphoria, which does exist. And, and that's absolutely fine. No one is saying, I hate the fact that you can feel like a woman, but women don't think, what's a man? I don't think, what does it feel like to be a man? I just am. I think most people are, but some people do have gender dysphoria. So what was the last bit of your question?
The last bit of the question was how did how one feels become.
Yeah, that's the big question. That's the big question. I have to, because I can't. I've been thinking and thinking and thinking. It must just be this gender identity ideology, this Judith Butler nonsense, peddled around the world. Well, in the Western world, it's peddled, uh, which is it, and it's absolutely, it's like a religion. It's a religion. You either believe it or you don't. But the trouble is the people that don't believe it now are being punished. No one should ever be in a position for not believing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, James, the last question. This is from Mo, and Mo says that one thing that strikes her about when people are cancelled, especially people in the arts, is that how few of their colleagues speak up for them or stand by them. And I think we've all seen examples of that over the past few years, especially with someone like Graham and also with you and others. And Mo asks, what has been your experience of arts colleagues standing by you or not standing by you, whether publicly or privately? What's been your experience?
Well, it's such a hard one because you know what? People have to eat and put food on the table. And so, I get lots of messages privately, lots, from way more people and people that would surprise you if you knew. But my thing is, you've got to make the decision to get in the bath yourself, into the hot bath yourself. You shouldn't be forced or pushed or coerced because it never works, because there will be consequences. So you don't want to work on television, or you want to make your life hard for yourself, get involved in a fight. If you're willing to fight and you're willing to accept what comes along with it, unfortunately, no one wants it, but it's part and parcel. But so I usually say people who text me saying, look, I really want to say something, but I just feel like my response is, if you're not prepared to get fully wet, don't get in the shower. And that's it. But I know I've got support, but I understand completely why people choose not to.
James, thank you very much.
You're welcome.